The cabin went quiet when the woman in the aisle said, "Ma'am, you need to step off this plane right now." And the man beside her tightened his grip on the armrest like the floor had just tilted. Nobody laughed. Nobody spoke. The engines outside hummed low and patient, a sound like a held breath, and the smell of jet fuel slipped in through the open door. The flight was scheduled from Kansas City to Seattle, an early evening departure favored by retirees heading home after visiting grandchildren. The light slanted in through the windows, turning the aisle into a narrow strip of gold. People were still standing, bags half stowed, coats folded over arms. The woman being addressed stood out by not standing at all. She remained seated in first class, seat 2 Delta, shoulders square, hands resting flat on her thighs. Her name was Evelyn Brooks. She was 58. Her hair was silvering at the temples, cut neat and practical. She wore a navy blazer that had seen a lot of airports, and a pair of black shoes polished to a dull shine. Nothing about her announced importance. Everything about her suggested discipline. Carol Whitman hovered over her with the stiff posture of someone who had learned to project authority long before learning when to soften it. Carol was 56, a senior flight attendant with 3 decades in the air. Her uniform was immaculate. Her smile, when it appeared, was thin and practiced, like something pulled from a drawer only when required. She kept one hand braced on the seatback ahead of Evelyn, knuckles pale. The other held a small tablet, angled just enough to imply evidence, without showing any. "I asked you a question," Carol said. Her voice carried, not loud but sharp, honed to cut through cabin noise. "Are you refusing a crew instruction?" A ripple of movement passed through the rows. A man with a Veterans of Foreign Wars cap shifted in his seat and looked down the aisle. A woman with a paperback paused mid-page. Somewhere toward the back, a baby fussed, then went quiet. Evelyn looked up slowly. Her eyes were calm. That calm made Carol uneasy, though she would never admit it. "I'm asking for clarification," Evelyn said. Her voice was low, steady. "You've checked my boarding pass twice. You've checked my identification. I've complied with every instruction. What exactly are you asking me to do now?" Carol inhaled through her nose. The tablet dipped. "I'm asking you to deplane so we can resolve a credentials issue without delaying departure." There it was. The word credentials hung in the air, heavy and vague. Evelyn felt it land in her chest like an old bruise pressed too hard. She glanced toward the cockpit door, still closed, still silent. She thought of the letter she had read 2 weeks earlier, written in a careful hand by a retired schoolteacher from Omaha. The woman had described being talked down to, brushed aside, made to feel small because she asked a simple question about seating. Evelyn had folded the letter and placed it in her desk drawer. She had decided then to see for herself. "What issue?" Evelyn asked. Carol leaned in, lowering her voice, but the tension made it carry anyway. "You presented a pilot credential. You're not listed as crew. We need to verify." A murmur moved through first class. The veteran in the cap cleared his throat. "She doesn't look like trouble," he said. Not loud, not confrontational. Just a statement. Carol straightened. "Sir, please remain seated." Evelyn felt the eyes on her now. She could feel the weight of assumption, the quiet arithmetic people did when deciding who belonged. She remembered being 22, standing outside a hangar in Tulsa, hands shaking as she held her first logbook. She remembered a man laughing and telling her she'd make a fine flight attendant. She remembered not laughing back. "I'm not a threat," Evelyn said, "and I'm not delaying anything." Carol's jaw tightened. She tapped the tablet. "Captain has been notified." That changed the air. The engine's hum felt louder. The open door seemed farther away. In the cockpit, Captain Michael Turner stared at the panel lights without really seeing them. He was 62, a contract pilot with a clean record and a calendar marked with the days until retirement. He had flown in storms, through mechanical failures, past the kind of fear that made your mouth go dry. He did not like surprises. The interphone crackled again. "Mike," Carol's voice said, clipped. "We have a passenger presenting pilot credentials, refusing to deplane for verification." Turner exhaled. He thought of the checklist. He thought of the stories, the headlines, the hearings. He thought of his pension. "Is she agitated?" "No," Carol said. There was a pause. "She's calm." That didn't help. Turner rubbed his forehead. Calm could mean anything. Calm could be rehearsed. Calm could be dangerous. Or calm could be nothing at all. He hated that the decision was his. "Do what you need to do to keep the cabin safe," he said finally, the words tasting like chalk. Back in the aisle, Carol lifted her chin. "Ma'am, this is your final request." Evelyn felt something in her loosen then. A quiet acceptance, not of the moment, but of what it meant. She could end this. She could say her name and watch the room rearrange itself around her. She could feel the power rush in like oxygen. The thought made her stomach turn. She stood instead. The movement startled people. A man reached instinctively for his wife's hand. Evelyn picked up her small carry-on, the leather scuffed at the corners, and slung it over her shoulder. She did not rush. She did not argue. She stepped into the aisle, close enough to Carol that she could smell the citrus of her hand lotion. "Let's verify," Evelyn said quietly. As she walked forward, the veteran in the cap met her eyes. There was apology there, confusion. He nodded once, small and respectful. On the jet bridge, the temperature dropped. The metal walls amplified every footstep. Two gate agents stood near a podium, faces already drawn tight with the promise of paperwork. One of them, a young man with freckles, glanced at Evelyn's shoes, then at her face, as if trying to solve a puzzle under time pressure. Carol spoke first. "We need to verify pilot credentials presented by a passenger." The freckled agent took the card, his fingers careful. He typed. The keyboard clicks sounded loud, too loud. Evelyn watched his screen reflect in his glasses. She thought of the hangar again. She thought of her father's hands, scarred from factory work, gripping the steering wheel as he drove her to her first flight lesson. She thought of the promise she had made to herself not to let small injustices slide, just because she could afford to. Inside the cabin, murmurs grew. Someone stood, then sat again. A woman whispered, "What's happening?" Another replied, "I don't know." The baby started crying again. In the cockpit, Turner felt the delay stretch. He imagined the schedule slipping. He imagined the call from operations. He told himself this was routine. He told himself he had done the right thing. On the jet bridge, the freckled agent's eyes widened a fraction. He looked at Carol, then back at Evelyn. "Ma'am," he said, voice uncertain, "I need to make a call." Evelyn nodded. Her pulse was steady. She could feel the moment approaching like a weather front, pressure building, air changing. She did not know exactly how it would break. She only knew it would. Behind her, the door to the aircraft remained open. The hum of the engines continued, patient and indifferent. And somewhere between the cockpit and the gate, between assumption and truth, the story tipped. Just enough for gravity to take over. 1. The call took longer than anyone expected. Long enough for the jet bridge to feel like a narrow hallway where time had stalled. Long enough for irritation to harden into something heavier. The freckled agent stepped away from the podium, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand rubbing the back of his neck as if trying to scrub away doubt. Carol Whitman stood rigid, arms folded now, chin lifted, eyes fixed somewhere past Evelyn's shoulder. She had crossed a line and she knew it, but pride kept her feet planted. Inside the cabin, the door remained open. The air conditioning cycled with a low mechanical sigh. Passengers shifted, checked watches, whispered to one another in careful tones. A grey-haired woman in a pearl cardigan leaned toward the aisle. "Is there a safety issue?" she asked no one in particular, her voice thin with concern. A man 2 rows back muttered that he had a connection. Another shook his head and stared out the window like he might find answers on the tarmac. Captain Michael Turner stood in the cockpit doorway at last, the door unlatched behind him, his presence filling the narrow space with authority that felt brittle. He scanned the scene quickly, eyes landing on Evelyn, then on Carol, then on the gate agents. He felt the weight of command press into his shoulders. He had learned long ago that uncertainty was contagious. He had also learned how to hide it. "Status," Turner said. Carol spoke immediately. "Passenger presented pilot credentials. Verification pending." Evelyn turned to face him. Up close, Turner could see the lines at the corners of her eyes, the steady set of her mouth. Not defiant, not afraid. It unsettled him more than anger would have. "I'm cooperating," Evelyn said. "I ask for clarification." Turner nodded once. He did not apologize. Apologies admitted fault, and he did not yet know where fault lay. "We'll sort it out," he said. "Please wait here." The freckled agent returned, his face pale now. He handed the phone to Turner without a word. Turner listened, his expression changing in small, precise increments. His jaw tightened. He glanced at Evelyn again, really looked this time, at the way she stood without slumping, at the way she held her bag like it mattered. He felt a flicker of recognition he could not place. The call ended. Turner handed the phone back. "We're holding," he said. "Ops wants confirmation." Carol's lips pressed together. "We're delaying the entire cabin for one passenger." Turner's eyes snapped to her. "We're ensuring compliance." Inside the plane, a man rose from his seat, despite the open door warning chime. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a windbreaker with an Air Force patch faded from years of washing. He spoke carefully, choosing his words like tools. "Captain," he said, voice carrying, "if there's a safety concern, say so. If not, maybe let the lady sit." A murmur of agreement followed, tentative but real. Someone clapped once, then stopped. Carol turned, color rising in her cheeks. "Sir, please remain seated." The man did not sit. He met Turner's gaze. Turner felt something twist in his gut. He had worn a uniform once too. He knew that look. "Sir," Turner said, softer, "we're handling it." The man hesitated, then sat, shaking his head. His wife squeezed his arm. Evelyn watched the exchange, the way authority shifted and resisted, the way people measured themselves against one another. She thought of the other letters in her drawer. She thought of how easily small decisions calcified into policy. She wondered, briefly, if she had underestimated how much this would cost. The freckled agent's supervisor arrived, breathless, tie askew, eyes darting. He took in the scene and swallowed. "We need to clear the jet bridge," he said. "Ops is escalating." Carol's shoulders relaxed a fraction, vindicated. Turner felt his stomach drop. Escalation meant records. It meant review. "Where's the concern?" the supervisor asked. "Credential verification," Carol said. The supervisor looked at Evelyn, then at the card still resting on the podium. He picked it up, read it, frowned. "This is valid," he said slowly. "Issued years ago." "Yes," Evelyn said, "it is." The supervisor hesitated. "Then what's the issue?" Carol opened her mouth, then closed it. The words she needed would not line up. She could feel the ground shifting under her certainty. Turner stepped in. "We received guidance to proceed cautiously." "From whom?" the supervisor asked. "Operations," Turner said. The supervisor exhaled. They want confirmation from headquarters. The cabin noise grew louder, frustration rising like heat. A woman near the front began to cry quietly, overwhelmed more than angry. A man cursed under his breath. Someone asked for water. The baby wailed again, full-throated now. Evelyn felt the tug of a decision pulling at her from opposite directions. She could wait, let the process grind. She could step forward, end it. She watched Carol's face, saw the fear peeking through the rigid posture. She watched Turner's hands, clasped too tight. She saw the supervisor's indecision. This was bigger than her now. It always had been. "Captain," Evelyn said softly. Turner turned. "Ma'am." "You're trying to do your job," she said. "So am I." He frowned. "Your job?" She held his gaze. "I asked for clarification because I've seen what happens when procedures replace judgment." Silence fell, thick and charged. Turner felt his pulse in his ears. He did not know why her words landed the way they did. He only knew they did. The supervisor cleared his throat. "We can reseat the passenger and depart," he said, uncertain. "Or we can offload and rebook." "Offload." The word hit the cabin like a dropped tray. Voices rose. "That's ridiculous! For what? She didn't do anything." Carol shook her head. "We can't ignore a potential issue." Turner closed his eyes for a beat. He saw the calendar again. He saw the last line of his career written in someone else's pen. He opened his eyes. "We'll deplane the passenger," he said. The words felt heavy, irreversible. Evelyn nodded. She had expected this. It did not make it easier. She turned toward the door. The veteran stood again, blocking the aisle this time. "This isn't right," he said. His voice shook. "You're making a mistake." Turner met his eyes. "Please," he said. "Sit down." The man did not move until his wife tugged his sleeve. He sat, defeated. Evelyn stepped onto the tarmac air, cool and sharp. The jet bridge door closed behind her with a final metallic thud that echoed longer than it should have. She stood there for a moment, breathing in the smell of rain and fuel, listening to the distant whine of another plane lifting off. She felt the eyes on her back, even though the door was shut. Behind that door, Carol exhaled, relief flooding her veins. The cabin would move again, order restored. Or so she told herself. In the cockpit, Turner stared at the closed door, a knot forming in his chest. He did not like the way this felt. He did not like the way the air seemed charged with consequence. On the tarmac, Evelyn reached into her bag and took out her phone. Her hand was steady. She did not call immediately. She watched the plane through the glass, the people inside settling back into their seats, the illusion of normalcy reasserting itself. She thought of the letters. She thought of the promise. She tapped the screen and brought the phone to her ear. "Hi," she said when the line connected. "It's me. I need you to hold the flight, and I need counsel present." A pause, a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Yes," Evelyn said. "I'm sure." She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her bag. The engine spooled up again, then wound down, uncertain. Somewhere inside, a decision made for convenience had begun to unravel, thread by thread. 2. The engines never restarted. They only whined once, low and uncertain, then fell silent again, a mechanical hesitation that sent a ripple of unease through the cabin. The seatbelt sign stayed dark. The door stayed closed. Time stretched, elastic and uncomfortable, and the illusion that this was a minor inconvenience began to crack. Inside the terminal, Evelyn Brooks stood near a concrete pillar marked with faded yellow paint, the kind of place passengers were never meant to linger. Her breath fogged slightly in the cool air. She had removed her blazer and folded it over her arm, revealing the white pilot's shirt beneath. The epaulets were gone. Deliberately. She had learned years ago that symbols only mattered when people chose to see them. Right now, she wanted nothing to distract from what came next. Footsteps approached fast, not rushed, but purposeful. Two men in dark jackets, bearing the discreet logo of Liberty Sky's operations, stopped a few feet from her. One was in his early 40s, clean-cut, eyes sharp. The other was older, heavier, with a legal pad tucked under his arm like a shield. "Ms. Brooks," the younger man said. It wasn't a question. Evelyn nodded once. "Thank you for coming." Behind them, through the terminal glass, the aircraft sat motionless, a long, silver body pinned to the gate. Passengers were still seated, watching, waiting, wondering. "We've placed a temporary hold on the flight," the older man said. "Captain Turner has been informed." Evelyn's mouth tightened. Good. They walked together, their footsteps echoing, past a line of windows that reflected them back as three figures moving with quiet inevitability. A few gate agents glanced over, then quickly looked away. Word was spreading. It always did. Inside the cabin, Carol Whitman felt the shift before she understood it. The delay had crossed some invisible threshold. This was no longer a hiccup. This was something else. She moved down the aisle, smile fixed, voice practiced. "Folks, thank you for your patience. We're just waiting on clearance." A man near the window scoffed. "Clearance for what? The plane was ready." Carol ignored him. Her eyes flicked toward the cockpit. Captain Turner sat rigid in his seat, hands clasped, staring straight ahead. He had called operations twice now. Each time the answer had been the same. Hold. "Carol," he said quietly over the interphone. "Come forward." She stepped into the galley. He turned to face her, his expression tight. "Ops says legal is involved." Her stomach dropped. "Legal? Why?" Turner shook his head. "They won't say. They asked for names, times, statements." Carol felt heat rise up her neck. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had followed procedure. She had done what she always did. She shouldn't have presented credentials if she wasn't crew, she said, more to convince herself than him. Turner did not respond. He looked past her, through the small cockpit window, at the terminal beyond. He felt the weight of the choice he had made settle deeper, heavier. He thought of the man in the Air Force cap. He thought of the woman's calm eyes. He thought of how easily he had let convenience decide for him. In the cabin, whispers turned into low conversations. A woman leaned across the aisle. "I don't think she did anything wrong," she said to her seatmate. "Did you see her face? She wasn't acting." Another man nodded. They just didn't like that she pushed back. The veteran stood again, ignoring Carol's glance. "If there's a problem, tell us," he said, louder now. "We're not children." Before Carol could respond, the cabin door opened. The sound cut through the chatter like a blade. Heads turned. Silence followed in uneven waves. Evelyn Brooks stepped back onto the aircraft. She was not alone. The two men from operations flanked her, their presence unmistakable. Behind them came a woman in a tailored grey suit, hair pulled back tight, eyes scanning the cabin with practiced precision. Legal. Further back, a familiar face appeared, one that had been printed on company newsletters and holiday emails for years. James Holloway, Chief Executive Officer of Liberty Sky's Airlines. He stopped just inside the door, letting the moment breathe. His gaze swept the cabin, taking in the frozen expressions, the half-open mouths, the sudden stillness. He nodded once to Captain Turner, then turned toward Evelyn. "Ma'am," he said, voice carrying. Thank you for your patience. Carol felt the floor tilt. Her mouth went dry. She looked from Holloway to Evelyn and back again, her mind scrambling for footing. This was wrong. This was out of sequence. She had not been prepared for this version of events. Evelyn stepped forward, unhurried. The cabin felt smaller now, compressed by attention. She paused in the aisle, letting her eyes meet those of the passengers she had left only minutes before. The veteran, the woman with the pearls, the crying baby, now quiet, staring at her with wide eyes. She turned to Carol. "Ms. Whitman," Evelyn said. Her voice was calm, but it carried an edge now, sharpened by purpose. "You asked me to step off this plane so you could verify my credentials." Carol swallowed. "Yes?" "You told the captain I was non-compliant." "Yes." "You implied I was misrepresenting myself." Carol hesitated. Every instinct told her to defend, to justify, to lean on years of service like armor. "I followed procedure." Evelyn nodded slowly. "That's what concerns me." James Holloway stepped forward. "For the record," he said, "Evelyn Brooks is a licensed commercial pilot with over 30 years of flight time. She is also the co-founder and controlling shareholder of Liberty Skies Airlines." The words landed like a shockwave. A gasp rippled through the cabin. Someone laughed once, sharp and disbelieving, then stopped. The veteran's eyes widened. He exhaled slowly, like a man released from a held breath. A woman pressed a hand to her mouth. Carol's face drained of color. She felt her knees weaken. The tablet slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor, loud in the silence. "No," she whispered. "That's not. I didn't." Evelyn watched her, not with satisfaction, but with a deep, steady sadness. "You didn't recognize me," she said. "That's true, but that's not the issue." Captain Turner stepped out of the cockpit, his face ashen. "Ms. Brooks," he said hoarsely. "I didn't know." Evelyn turned to him. "You didn't ask." The simplicity of it struck him harder than any accusation could have. He nodded, once, accepting the blow. James Holloway cleared his throat. "This flight will not be departing as scheduled," he said to the cabin. Groans rose, then fell quiet as he raised a hand. "Every passenger will be rebooked. Full compensation will be provided. I apologize for the inconvenience." Evelyn took a breath. This was the moment people would remember. She faced the passengers again. "I boarded this flight as a customer," she said, "because I needed to see something for myself. What I saw was not about one person. It was about a system that mistakes authority for judgment." Her eyes moved back to Carol, then to Turner. This plane did not turn back. It stopped, because it had to. The silence that followed was not stunned now. It was heavy, reflective. And beneath it, something else began to stir. Accountability. No one moved at first. The cabin sat suspended in a strange aftershock, the kind that follows an unexpected verdict. Air no longer rushed through the vents. The lights felt brighter. Every sound seemed amplified, from the faint whir of cooling avionics to the soft creak of seat cushions as people shifted under the weight of what they had just heard. Carol Whitman was still standing where she had frozen, her back half turned toward the aisle, her shoulders locked as if bracing for impact. 31 years of muscle memory told her to straighten her posture, to reclaim control, to say something official. Nothing came. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She felt suddenly exposed, like a stage light had found her without warning. Captain Turner remained near the cockpit's doorway, one hand braced against the bulkhead. He felt the familiar authority of the uniform drain away, replaced by something colder. Scrutiny. He had commanded aircraft through thunderstorms, through mechanical failures, through moments when lives depended on his calm. He had never felt smaller than he did now, standing inches from a woman he had dismissed with a single decision made for convenience. James Holloway waited. He was good at that. Years in boardrooms had taught him the power of silence. He let it stretch just long enough to force everyone to sit with the truth before he spoke again. "We're going to deplane in an orderly fashion," he said finally. "Gate agents will assist." A low wave of movement followed. Seatbelts clicked open. Bags were pulled from under seats. People stood, not rushed now, but subdued. Conversations resumed in hushed fragments. "That was her," someone whispered. "I knew something was off." "God help her," another murmured, glancing at Carol. Evelyn stepped aside to let passengers pass. She watched their faces as they moved by her, reading the quiet recalculations. Some offered nods. Some offered apologies without words. One man stopped briefly, eyes downcast. "I'm sorry," he said. He did not explain for what. She nodded once and let him go. Carol forced herself to move. Her legs felt weak, unreliable. She stepped into the galley, gripping the counter with one hand as if the plane itself might steady her. A junior attendant hovered nearby, eyes wide, breathing shallow. "Carol," she whispered. "What's happening?" Carol did not answer. She could not yet form a sentence that did not unravel. Behind them, the legal counsel leaned in toward James Holloway. Her voice was low, precise. "We need statements from the crew, immediately, especially regarding the initial report." James nodded. His jaw was set now. He glanced toward Evelyn, who stood near the front row, her expression unreadable. He felt a familiar tightening in his chest. This was not a public relations issue. This was structural. This was rot. Captain Turner approached Evelyn slowly. Each step felt deliberate, weighted. "Ms. Brooks," he said. His voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat. "I want to apologize." Evelyn met his eyes. She did not soften. She did not harden. "For what?" she asked. "For not coming back here myself," he said. "For letting fear make the call." She considered him. She saw the man beneath the rank, the years, the quiet compromises that accumulate unnoticed. "Fear makes liars of all of us," she said. "The question is, what you do after." He nodded, swallowing. "I'll cooperate fully." "I expect nothing less," she replied. The last passengers filtered off the aircraft. The cabin emptied until only uniforms remained. The space felt larger now, echoing, stripped of its audience. James Holloway turned to the legal counsel. "Begin," he said. She nodded and addressed the crew. "We'll be conducting individual interviews. You are not under arrest. You are required to answer truthfully. Any attempt to coordinate statements will be noted." Carol flinched. Coordinate statements. The phrase landed like a gavel. She thought of the times she had coached new attendants on phrasing, on how to write reports that emphasized compliance and minimized conflict. She had always told herself it was about clarity, about efficiency. She wondered when exactly it had crossed into something else. The junior attendant stepped forward, hands trembling. I thought it was wrong," she said suddenly. Her voice broke the heavy quiet. "When you asked her to leave, I thought it was wrong, but I didn't say anything." Carol turned sharply. "Claire?" The legal counsel raised a hand. "Thank you," she said to the junior attendant. "We'll speak shortly." Carol felt the air leave her lungs. The shield she had worn for decades, built from seniority and silence, had cracked. She realized, with a cold clarity, how alone she was. Evelyn watched the exchange from a few steps back. This was the moment she had feared and hoped for in equal measure. Not the reveal, not the shock. This, the unraveling, the human cost. She felt it in her chest, a dull ache she had learned to carry. She turned and walked slowly down the aisle, fingertips brushing the tops of seats. She remembered designing this cabin years ago, arguing for wider aisles, better lighting. Dignity, she had called it then. She wondered how many times it had failed. James Holloway joined her near the wing. "We can ground the route," he said quietly. "Issue a statement. Contain it." Evelyn shook her head. "Containment is what got us here." He sighed. "The board will push back." "They always do," she said. "That's their job. This is ours." He studied her, seeing not just the owner now, but the pilot she had always been, the one who understood systems, failure points, consequences. "What do you want to do?" he asked. She did not answer immediately. She looked back toward the galley, where Carol sat now, head in her hands, shoulders shaking silently. She looked at Captain Turner, standing alone near the cockpit, staring at the floor like a man awaiting sentence. She looked at the junior attendant, pale but resolute. "We start with the truth," Evelyn said. "No statements drafted to soften it. No language about misunderstandings." James nodded slowly. "We suspend the crew pending investigation," she continued. "Not as punishment, as protection. For everyone." "And the flight?" "We cancel it," she said. "Not because of safety. Because of integrity." James exhaled. He could already hear the arguments, the cost, the disruption. He also knew she was right. Evelyn took one last look at the empty cabin. It felt like a church after a hard confession. "People trusted us," she said quietly. "Especially the ones who don't raise their voices." James followed her gaze. "They still can," he said. "Only if we earn it back," she replied. Outside, dusk had deepened. The aircraft sat silent against the darkening sky, lights reflecting off its polished skin. Ground crew moved around it with cautious purpose, as if aware they were handling something fragile. Inside, something irreversible had begun. Not a scandal, a reckoning. 4. The terminal had emptied of spectacle, but not of consequence. Word moved faster than any press release ever could, slipping through group texts and quiet phone calls, through the practiced networks of people who had spent decades inside systems that preferred silence. By the time Evelyn Brooks reached the glass-walled conference room overlooking the tarmac, the situation had already grown larger than the plane. Night had settled fully now. Floodlights cast hard white circles across the concrete. The aircraft sat isolated at the gate, jet bridge pulled back, doors sealed. A grounded thing that looked suddenly vulnerable. Evelyn stood at the window for a long moment, hands clasped behind her back, posture straight but heavy. She felt the familiar pull of responsibility settle into her shoulders, the same weight she had felt on her first solo flight, when the runway lights blurred through rain and doubt tried to speak louder than training. Behind her, the room filled quietly. James Holloway entered first, jacket off, sleeves rolled, the executive mask replaced by something tighter, more alert. The legal counsel followed, folders already open, pen uncapped. A man from operations joined them, eyes red from stress, phone buzzing non-stop in his hand. "We've got inquiries," James said. "Not media yet. Retired pilots, union reps, a former board member." Evelyn nodded without turning. "Good. That means people are paying attention." "The board will convene an emergency call," the legal counsel added. "They'll want reassurance." Evelyn finally faced them. Her expression was controlled, but there was no softness left in it now. "They'll want distance," she said, "and I won't give it to them." A silence followed, respectful but uneasy. James knew that tone. It meant the path ahead would be narrow and expensive. Captain Turner and Ms. Whitman have both been escorted to separate offices, the operations manager said. Statements are being taken. Good, Evelyn said. No joint interviews, no coaching. James hesitated. Carol Whitman's union rep is already en route. Of course they are, Evelyn replied. Let them come. This isn't about ambush. It's about record. She sat at the long table, palms resting flat against the polished surface. The room felt colder now, the hum of overhead lights too present. She could feel the ache behind her eyes, the kind that came when exhaustion met resolve. She did not let it show. In a small office down the hall, Carol Whitman sat rigid in a chair that suddenly felt too low, too exposed. Her hands were folded in her lap, fingers interlaced so tightly they had gone numb. Across from her, a human resources manager spoke calmly, methodically, asking questions Carol had answered 100 times before in training scenarios. But this was different. There was no script that covered this version of events. Did you believe the passenger posed an immediate safety threat? The manager asked. Carol opened her mouth, closed it. She could hear her own breath, shallow and uneven. I believed it needed verification, she said finally. That's not the question, the manager replied gently. Carol's eyes flicked to the door, as if expecting rescue. None came. No, she said, barely audible. Not immediate. The word settled into the room, heavy as lead. In another office, Captain Turner stared at the wall as a legal representative spoke. He answered when asked. He did not embellish. He felt stripped down to something unrecognizable, his career reduced to a sequence of decisions laid bare under fluorescent light. He kept seeing Evelyn's face when she said, "You didn't ask." The simplicity of it haunted him. Back in the conference room, James Holloway rubbed his temples. We're already calculating the cost, he said. Rebooking, compensation, the ripple effect. Evelyn leaned back in her chair. And the cost of not doing this? James didn't answer. He knew it was rhetorical. He also knew the numbers would never fully capture it. The legal counsel cleared her throat. There is potential exposure under federal aviation regulations regarding misuse of safety authority. If this escalates externally, it will, Evelyn said. The counsel paused. Then we should prepare a response. We will, Evelyn said. But not tonight. Tonight, we document. We listen. James studied her. You're sure about delaying a statement? Yes. He nodded slowly. Then we need to talk about next steps internally. Evelyn stood again, returning to the window. The plane looked smaller now, dwarfed by the terminal lights and the dark stretch of runway beyond. She thought of her father again, of how he had stood at the fence of a small municipal airport when she was a child, watching planes lift into the sky he had never been allowed to claim. He had taught her that flight was not about height. It was about responsibility. We start with accountability, she said. Not punishment. Accountability. James crossed his arms. The board will want reassurance that this won't become a precedent. Evelyn turned sharply. It needs to become one. The words hung in the air, decisive and dangerous. People think culture changes with slogans, she continued. It doesn't. It changes when consequences stop being theoretical. The operations manager shifted uncomfortably. There are senior crew members who will feel targeted. Then they should examine why, Evelyn replied. James sighed, long and controlled. This will cost us. Evelyn met his gaze. Integrity always does. In the short term. He held her eyes, then nodded. All right. A knock interrupted them. The legal counsel answered the door, A uniformed security officer spoke quietly, then stepped aside. "They're ready for you," the counsel said to Evelyn. "Both of them." Evelyn took a breath. She felt the weight of what she was about to do settle fully now, not as fear, but as gravity. She walked out of the conference room and down the corridor, her footsteps measured, echoing softly. The walls were lined with framed photographs of aircraft, of smiling crews from decades past. She wondered how many of those smiles hid compromises made for convenience. She stopped first outside Carol Whitman's door. She could hear muffled sobbing inside, quickly stifled. Evelyn placed her hand briefly against the cool glass. Not in comfort, in acknowledgement. Then she moved on. By the time she reached the end of the hall, the terminal beyond the glass was nearly empty. The night felt deep, watchful. Somewhere above, other planes cut through the dark, carrying people who trusted systems they rarely questioned. Evelyn Brooks squared her shoulders and stepped forward. This was no longer about a seat, or a credential, or a single flight that never left the ground. It was about what happened next. 5. Evelyn entered the room without ceremony. The door closed behind her with a soft, definitive click that sounded louder than it should have. Carol Whitman sat at the small conference table, shoulders hunched now, the rigidity gone, replaced by something brittle and exposed. Her eyes were red. A half-empty paper cup of water sat untouched near her hand. She looked up as Evelyn approached, and for a brief moment something like recognition flickered there. Not of status, of consequence. Evelyn did not sit. She remained standing, hands loosely clasped in front of her, posture composed, but not distant. "Ms. Whitman," she said. Her voice was even, controlled. "I'm not here to argue with you." Carol swallowed hard. "I did my job," she said, the words tumbling out too fast, rehearsed and fraying. "I followed the procedures they trained us on. I've done this for over 30 years. I've kept people safe." "I know," Evelyn said. "That's why this matters." Carol frowned, confusion cutting through the panic. "Then why am I sitting here like a criminal?" Evelyn leaned one palm on the table, close enough that Carol could not look away. "Because safety without judgment becomes a weapon," she said, "and authority without reflection becomes cruelty." Carol's breath caught. She shook her head. "You don't understand what it's like up there. The pressure. One mistake and it's your name on a report. Your career. You learn to trust your instincts." "Instincts are shaped," Evelyn replied, "by habit, by culture, by what's tolerated." Silence stretched. Carol's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. "You think this is about race," she said finally, defensively. "You think I singled you out because of how you look." Evelyn's gaze did not waver. "I think you saw someone who didn't match the picture in your head," she said. "And instead of questioning the picture, you questioned the person." Carol opened her mouth, then closed it. Her shoulders sagged. The fight drained out of her, leaving something raw behind. "I didn't recognize you," she said weakly. "That's true," Evelyn said. "But recognition isn't required for respect." Carol's eyes filled again. She looked down. "What happens now?" Evelyn straightened. "You're suspended pending investigation, with pay. You'll have representation. You'll be heard." Carol let out a shaky breath. "And after that?" "That depends on what you're willing to confront," Evelyn said, "and what the record shows." Carol nodded slowly. "I never meant to hurt anyone." Evelyn paused at the door. "Intent doesn't erase impact," she said quietly. "But accountability can still mean something." She left without another word. Down the hall, Captain Turner sat alone, elbows on his knees, hands clasped like a man waiting for news outside an operating room. He looked up when Evelyn entered, eyes rimmed with fatigue and something like shame. Ms. Brooks, he said, standing too quickly. I appreciate you seeing me. She gestured for him to sit. He did. She took the chair across from him this time, finally allowing herself to settle. You know why you're here, she said. Yes, he replied. And I know I failed. Evelyn studied him. Why didn't you come back into the cabin? He rubbed his hands together, a nervous habit. Because I was tired, he said. Because I've seen things go wrong fast when you hesitate. Because I told myself trusting my crew was leadership. And was it? She asked. He shook his head. It was avoidance. The word hung between them, honest and heavy. I didn't see you as a threat, he continued. I saw a problem that could become one, and I chose the option that protected me. Evelyn nodded. Most people do. He looked up sharply. Is that supposed to make it better? No, she said. It's supposed to make it clear. He swallowed. What happens to me? You'll be grounded pending review, Evelyn said. Your license will be evaluated by an independent panel. Not to punish you. To understand the decision chain. Turner closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were wet. I've spent my whole life earning this, he said. One decision reveals a pattern, Evelyn said gently. Not your whole life, but enough to require correction. He nodded slowly. I'll cooperate. I expect that, she said. And I expect you to sit with this, not just as a captain, as a person. He managed a weak smile. You don't pull punches. No, Evelyn said. I land planes. When she left him, the terminal clock read 10:27 in the evening. The night outside was deep and still, the kind that made airports feel like islands of light floating in darkness. Evelyn returned to the conference room, where James Holloway and the legal counsel waited, their faces tight with the strain of managing fallout before it fully surfaced. They're both suspended, Evelyn said. Statements are being finalized. James exhaled. The board call is set for midnight. Evelyn nodded. Good, they'll be awake enough to listen. The legal counsel slid a document across the table. We've identified potential violations under federal aviation regulations regarding improper escalation of security concerns. This will need to be disclosed. Evelyn read without comment. She felt the familiar tension between what was safe and what was right press in again. She set the paper down. We disclose. James blinked. Fully? Yes. That will invite scrutiny. It deserves it, she said. James leaned back, studying her. You realize what this could trigger? I do, Evelyn replied. And I'm prepared. Outside, a janitorial crew moved quietly through the terminal, mops swishing, trash carts rolling softly over tile. Life went on around the stillness, indifferent to the turning of institutional gears. Evelyn stood once more at the window. The grounded aircraft reflected her image back at her, layered over the lights and the dark beyond. She felt tired now, deeply so, but beneath it was a steadiness she trusted. This was not rage. This was resolve. Tomorrow, she said without turning, we begin the harder part. James joined her at the glass. Which is? Changing what people think authority looks like, she said, and proving that dignity isn't a courtesy. It's a requirement. In the distance, another plane lifted off, its lights rising cleanly into the night. Evelyn watched until it disappeared, then turned back to the work waiting behind her. The reckoning had moved past the cabin. Now it would test the whole system. 6. The board call came through at 11:53 in the evening, the kind of hour chosen to thin out voices and sharpen tempers. The screen at the end of the conference room lit up in a grid of faces, some tired, some guarded, some already bristling. Men and women who had built careers on caution leaned back in leather chairs, framed by bookshelves and dimly lit studies. They had been briefed. They had opinions. They had not yet been told what they were going to hear. James Holloway sat to Evelyn's right, jacket back on, tie loosened. The legal counsel took the seat to her left, a stack of documents aligned with surgical precision. Evelyn remained standing. She had not planned it that way, but when the first voice spoke, clipped and impatient, she stayed on her feet. "This is an overreaction," said a man with a silver watch and a wall of awards behind him. "One crew dispute, one delayed flight. We are talking about suspensions and disclosures at midnight." Evelyn waited. She watched the others shift, some nodding, some avoiding the camera. She let the impatience crest. "This is not a crew dispute," she said when the room finally quieted. Her voice was calm, but it carried, firm and unyielding. "It is a documented misuse of safety authority that escalated without verification, without judgment, and without accountability." A woman with short grey hair leaned forward. "With respect, Evelyn, you're too close to this." Evelyn did not flinch. "With respect," she replied, "I was the passenger removed from that aircraft." The grid stilled. A few faces registered surprise they had failed to hide earlier. Others hardened. "That is precisely my point," the woman said carefully. "Personal experience can cloud. Personal experience clarifies," Evelyn cut in. "Especially when it reveals a pattern that reports have failed to surface." James glanced at her, then at the screen. He knew this moment. He felt the shift from discussion to confrontation, and let it happen. A voice from another square broke in. "We are custodians of shareholder value," the man said. "Public disclosures invite scrutiny we do not need." Evelyn finally sat, but only to lean forward, elbows on the table. "Scrutiny is not the risk," she said. "Secrecy is." The legal counsel slid a document onto the shared screen. Dates, times, a sequence of decisions. "We have identified procedural deviations," she said. "Specifically, escalation without corroboration and reliance on assumption rather than observed behavior. These are violations under federal aviation guidance." A low murmur moved through the grid. Someone swore under their breath. "Are you recommending discipline?" the Silver Watch man asked. "I'm recommending sunlight," Evelyn said. "Discipline follows facts. Facts follow transparency." The woman with grey hair sighed. "And what about the crew? We cannot destroy careers over perception." Evelyn felt the familiar pull then, the ache she carried quietly. She thought of Carol Whitman's hands shaking around a paper cup. She thought of Captain Turner's eyes, wet with the understanding that he had failed himself as much as anyone else. She did not harden against it. She spoke through it. "No one is being destroyed," she said. "They are being paused, evaluated, held to the same standard we promise our customers and our crews. Dignity, judgment, responsibility." A man at the far end of the grid leaned in. "You're asking us to endorse a precedent?" "Yes," Evelyn said. "A necessary one." Silence followed. Then, reluctantly, questions. How long would suspensions last? How would routes be covered? What would be said if this reached the press? James answered where he could. The legal counsel outlined risk without panic. Evelyn listened, interjecting only to correct language that softened truth into comfort. When the call ended, no votes had been taken, no resolutions passed. But something had shifted. The room exhaled. James stood and stretched, rolling his shoulders. "They'll push back," he said quietly. "In the morning." "They always do," Evelyn replied. She felt the fatigue now, deep in her bones. She pressed her fingertips to the table, grounding herself. The legal counsel gathered her papers. "We should prepare for external interest," she said. "Someone in that cabin will talk." Evelyn nodded. They should. James studied her. "You're inviting a storm." "I'm refusing to pretend the sky is clear," she said. They stepped out into the terminal corridor together. It was nearly empty now, the echo of their footsteps the only sound. Cleaning crews worked around them, moving with the practiced invisibility of people who kept places running after everyone else went home. Evelyn stopped near a window that overlooked the runway. The lights stretched away in long white lines, disappearing into darkness. She felt suddenly very old. Not weak, just aware of time. James noticed. "You all right?" She took a breath. "I remember my first check ride," she said unexpectedly. "The examiner asked me why I wanted to fly. I told him because it made me feel free. He told me freedom had nothing to do with it. He said flying was about accountability at altitude." James smiled faintly. He wasn't wrong. "No," she said, "and neither are we." Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. A message from operations. "Media inquiry. Unconfirmed." She showed it to James. "Morning news cycle," he said. Evelyn nodded. "Then we don't sleep." They moved back toward the conference room, where staff were already returning, laptops open, voices low but urgent. The machine was waking up. In a small office down the hall, Carol Whitman sat alone now, the interview concluded, the adrenaline gone. She stared at her hands, replaying moments with merciless clarity. The calm woman's eyes, the veteran's voice, the way certainty had turned brittle in her mouth. She had always believed she was protecting something. She was no longer sure what. Across the terminal, Captain Turner packed his flight bag with slow, deliberate movements. He had removed his cap and set it carefully inside. He did not know when he would wear it again. He felt a hollow grief, not just for what he might lose, but for what he had failed to be when it mattered. Back in the conference room, Evelyn stood at the head of the table again. She watched her team gather, saw the fear and resolve intermingled. She felt her own vulnerability press close, a quiet voice asking if this was worth the cost. She answered it the only way she knew how. She straightened. "We're going to document everything," she said. "We're going to tell the truth without varnish. We're going to take the heat and keep going." A young operations manager raised his hand, hesitant. "And if the board forces a reversal?" Evelyn met his eyes. "Then they force a conversation this company has avoided for too long." The room stilled. The lights hummed. Outside, dawn crept closer, invisible but inevitable. Evelyn Brooks felt the tempo rise again, not as panic, but as purpose. The cabin had been the spark, the system was the fuel, and she was not done flying yet. 7 morning came without ceremony. No sunrise through glass, no soft easing into daylight. Just a grey wash over the runway lights and the low thrum of an airport that never truly slept. The terminal monitors flickered as schedules updated, lines rerouted. Quiet chaos settling into routine. To the outside world, it looked like another delayed flight in another busy airport. Inside Liberty skies, it felt like a fault line finally splitting open. By 6:15 in the morning, the first call hit national media. A producer from a morning news program. Then another. Then a third. Phones buzzed across the operations floor, vibrating against desks like trapped insects. Someone had posted a blurry video from the gate, just a few seconds long. Evelyn Brooks, stepping off the aircraft. A uniformed crew member standing rigid beside her. No audio, no context. Just implication. Enough to ignite speculation. James Holloway stood at the center of the operations room, jacket back on, voice calm but clipped as he delegated. Route comms through legal. No statements yet. Acknowledge receipt only. He glanced toward the glass-walled office where Evelyn sat alone, reviewing a timeline spread across the table. Names, times, decisions. Not emotions. Facts. She read slowly, methodically, as if this were a post-incident report after a near miss. Because that was how she saw it. A near miss in culture. One more and the system would have failed catastrophically. A knock came at the door. James entered, closing it behind him. "They're framing it already," he said. "Passenger removed, racial undertones, authority abuse." Evelyn didn't look up. "Is it inaccurate?" "No," he admitted. "Incomplete." "That's always how it starts," she said. She stood and walked to the window overlooking the RAM. Ground crews moved with practiced efficiency, unaware that the company that paid them was under a microscope. She thought of the people who would wake up, turn on their televisions, and see a story shaped by speculation rather than truth. She did not fear it. She feared silence more. "We release at 8, she said. James stiffened. "The board, I know," Evelyn replied. "They'll want to wait. They always do." He studied her profile, the fatigue etched deeper now, but tempered by resolve. "What do you want to say?" "The truth," she said. "Plain, unembellished, no euphemisms." In a small briefing room down the corridor, Carol Whitman sat across from her union representative, a man she had known for years. He watched her closely, pen idle in his hand. "Tell me exactly what you said," he prompted. Carol stared at the table. She could hear her own voice replaying, sharp and certain. She winced. "I thought I was protecting the cabin," she said. "I didn't think. I didn't stop to think." "That matters," he said carefully. "Does it?" she asked, looking up at him for the first time. "Or does it just explain how I got here?" He had no answer. 2 floors above, Captain Turner sat alone in a quiet lounge reserved for crew awaiting reassignment. He had not slept. He watched a news ticker scroll silently across a muted screen. Airline incident under review. No names yet. He knew it was only a matter of time. He felt oddly calm. The worst part was over. The waiting was what remained. At 7:45, the operations floor stilled. Phones were set down. Conversations hushed. James stood near Evelyn, tablet in hand, eyes scanning for last-minute objections that did not come. The legal counsel nodded once. It was time. Evelyn stepped forward. The statement went out digitally first. No logo, no slogans, just text. Liberty Skies Airlines confirms that a passenger was removed from Flight 832 on the morning of this date, following an internal escalation that did not meet our standards for judgment, verification, or dignity. The flight was cancelled as a result. We take responsibility for the decision chain that led to this outcome. An independent review is underway. Crew members involved have been placed on administrative leave pending findings. We apologize to our passengers and to the individual who was wrongfully removed. No mention of race, no mention of ownership, no attempt to control the narrative. Within minutes, the phones erupted again. "What about the video?" James asked quietly. Evelyn nodded. "They'll find out." They did. At 8:12 in the morning, a second clip surfaced. Clearer, longer. A voice caught on audio this time. Carol's. The words "credentials issue" audible, unmistakable. Commentators filled the gaps with their own conclusions. Social media did what it always did, compressing nuance into outrage. Then someone recognized her. Not Evelyn Brooks, the passenger. Evelyn Brooks, the pilot. An aviation blogger pulled an old interview from an archive, a black and white photo from decades earlier. Evelyn in a flight jacket, smiling beside a small prop plane. The caption read, "Co-founder of Liberty Skies reflects on early days." The connection snapped into place. By 9 o'clock, the headline had changed. Airline co-founder removed from her own flight after crew escalation. James watched the numbers climb on his screen. This is exhilarating. Evelyn sat down slowly. She felt the first real tremor of exhaustion pass through her hands. She clasped them together, steadying herself. This was the moment she had anticipated and dreaded. The reveal stripped away abstraction. Now it was personal. Now it was undeniable. Her phone buzzed. A message from an old friend, a retired pilot. "About time," it read. She exhaled. In the cabin of the grounded aircraft, cleaners moved quietly, wiping surfaces, resetting a space that had become evidence. A woman paused near seat 2 Delta, looking around as if the story might still be there, embedded in the fabric. In the union office, Carol watched the headline appear on a muted television. The words "co-founder" and "removed" sat side by side. Her breath caught painfully. Ownership. Power. The realization did not bring fear so much as a crushing clarity. She had not challenged a threat. She had challenged a mirror and shattered it. At 9:30, the board reconvened. This time, no one argued about waiting. Evelyn stood again before the screen, the same grid of faces now altered by urgency. "You know who I am," she said simply. "You know what happened. And you know what comes next." A man who had spoken loudest the night before leaned forward. "This will define us." "Yes," Evelyn said. "That's why we don't flinch." Silence followed. Not resistance, consideration. Outside, the morning sun finally broke through the clouds, glinting off aircraft tails lined up like sentinels. The story was no longer contained within a cabin or a terminal. It had entered the bloodstream of the company. And the real test was about to begin. By mid-morning, the story had hardened into something the company could no longer shape, only face. The airport no longer felt like an island of glass and steel. It felt like a crossroads. Reporters clustered beyond security lines. Cameras tracked every executive badge that flashed past. The questions were no longer speculative. They were pointed. Who knew? How long? How often? Evelyn Brooks watched it all from a distance, not hiding, but not offering herself up yet either. She had learned long ago that the loudest moment was rarely the most important one. The real decisions were made before the microphones turned on. In the legal briefing room, the independent review team assembled. Not internal compliance officers, not friendly consultants, former regulators, retired aviation safety investigators, people whose reputations were built on ending careers, not preserving them. They spread documents across the table, like surgeons preparing instruments. "This is not about one incident," said Robert Hale, a former federal aviation investigator in his late 60s, voice roughened by years of testimony rooms. "This is about escalation culture. Who is empowered to label a person a risk, and how often that power goes unchecked?" Evelyn nodded. "That's why you're here." Hale looked at her steadily. "You understand this may implicate more than the crew on that flight." "I expect it to," she replied. Across the terminal, Carol Whitman sat in a quiet office, no longer under questioning, just waiting. Waiting was worse. The adrenaline had burned off, leaving only clarity and dread. Her phone buzzed repeatedly with messages she did not open. Colleagues, friends. One from her sister that she deleted without reading. The television remained on mute, the headline looping beneath a commentator's moving mouth. She replayed the moment again and again. The calm voice, the eyes that did not plead, the certainty that had felt like defiance. Carol had told herself for years that she could spot trouble before it bloomed. She saw now that she had mistaken difference for danger so many times that the distinction had eroded completely. Captain Turner, meanwhile, had driven home instead of waiting in the crew lounge. He sat at his kitchen table, still in uniform, hands wrapped around a mug he had not touched. The house was quiet. Too quiet. His wife stood in the doorway, watching him with a mix of concern and anger. "You didn't call," she said. "I didn't know what to say," he answered. She crossed her arms. "Did you really think she was a threat?" Turner closed his eyes. "No." The word landed between them like a dropped plate. Fragile. Broken. "Then why?" she pressed. He shook his head slowly. "Because it was easier than asking the wrong questions." She said nothing after that. She turned and walked away, leaving him alone with the truth he could no longer outrun. Back at headquarters, the board reconvened in person. No screens now, no distance. The room was large, wood-paneled, designed to convey permanence. That permanence felt brittle today. Evelyn entered last, carrying nothing but a slim folder. She did not sit until everyone else had. "We are suspending all discretionary security escalations effective immediately," she said without preamble, "until the review concludes." A murmur ran around the table. "That's operationally risky," one director objected. "So is allowing unchecked authority," Evelyn replied. Another leaned forward. "You're grounding judgment." "No," she said. "I'm grounding assumption." She opened the folder and slid copies across the table. Prior complaints, redacted. Patterns highlighted in clean, clinical yellow. Names removed, but behaviors unmistakable. The room grew quiet as pages turned. "This is not new," Evelyn continued. "It's just been survivable. Until now." A director who had been silent until then spoke, voice low. "If this report goes public..." "It will," Evelyn said. He exhaled. "Then we lose control." Evelyn met his gaze. Control is not the same as leadership. Silence followed, longer this time. Not resistance, recognition. Outside the building, protest signs appeared. Not angry, not chaotic. Simple cardboard messages held by retirees, former employees, frequent flyers. Dignity is not optional. Safety requires judgment. We deserve better. Evelyn watched from the window for a moment, her chest tightening. This was the part no balance sheet could measure. Trust breaking into the open. By early afternoon, the independent review issued a preliminary finding. No criminal wrongdoing, but clear evidence of improper escalation, failure of verification protocols, and a culture that discouraged challenge once authority was asserted. The language was measured. The implications were not. James Holloway read it twice, then looked up at Evelyn. "This will end careers." "Yes," she said quietly. "And prevent others from ending quietly." He nodded, a grim acceptance settling in. Carol received the call shortly after. Administrative leave without pay pending final determination. She listened without interrupting. When the line went dead, she sat very still. 31 years, reduced to a few sentences. She felt anger rise, then fade. In its place came something else, regret sharp enough to hurt. She stood and walked to the window of her small apartment. Below, life moved on. Cars, pedestrians. None of them knew her name. None of them needed to. Captain Turner received his own notice that evening. Temporary suspension of flight duties. Mandatory evaluation. Possible early retirement. He folded the letter carefully, as if it might cut him if he handled it roughly. He did not feel wronged. He felt exposed. As dusk settled again, Evelyn remained at her desk, the building around her slowly emptying. She had not eaten. She had not rested. The fatigue sat deep, but beneath it was something steadier than adrenaline: conviction. She opened an old drawer and removed a framed photograph she kept there, usually hidden. Her father, standing beside a small aircraft, smiling with pride and restraint. He had taught her that flying was not about proving you belonged. It was about proving you were worthy of the responsibility once you were there. She placed the frame on her desk, facing outward. Tomorrow there would be press conferences, lawsuits, debates, attempts to soften language and spread blame thin enough that no one had to carry it. But tonight, the line had been drawn. Not in the air, on the ground, where accountability lives. 9. The press room filled before anyone announced it was ready. Cameras lined the back wall, red lights blinking awake like watchful eyes. Reporters murmured, shuffling notes, adjusting microphones. The Liberty Skies logo hung behind the podium, unchanged, familiar, suddenly heavier with meaning. Evelyn Brooks waited just off stage, hands folded, breathing slow and deliberate. She felt the weight of the last 24 hours settle into her bones, not as doubt, but as resolve that had finally chosen a direction. James Holloway stood beside her, voice low. Once you step out there, there's no taking it back. Evelyn nodded. I'm not here to take anything back. She walked to the podium without music, without announcement. The room stilled on instinct. She did not smile. She did not scan the crowd. She placed her hands on the wood, felt its solid resistance, and looked straight ahead. My name is Evelyn Brooks, she said. I am a licensed commercial pilot. I am a co-founder and controlling shareholder of Liberty Skies Airlines. Yesterday morning, I boarded one of our flights as a passenger. I was removed from that aircraft following an internal escalation that failed to meet our standards. She paused. The cameras leaned in. This is not a story about recognition, she continued. It is not a story about status. It is a story about judgment, and about what happens when authority replaces it. She spoke without notes, voice steady, precise. She outlined the sequence of events without embellishment. She named the failures without naming people. She accepted responsibility without qualifiers. When she reached the decision to cancel the flight, she did not apologize for it. She explained it. A system that cannot stop itself when it is wrong is not safe, she said. Not for passengers, not for crew, not for the public trust. Hands rose. She acknowledged one. Are you firing anyone? A reporter asked. Evelyn met the question without flinching. We are investigating, she said. Where accountability is required, it will be taken. Where training is required, it will be mandatory. Where culture has hardened into habit, it will change. Another hand. Is this about race? Evelyn inhaled once. This is about patterns, she said. Patterns that disproportionately harm people who are already asked to prove they belong. Ignoring that reality would be dishonest. A third voice cut through. Why ground procedures now? Why not wait? Because waiting protects comfort, Evelyn replied, not safety. The room buzzed. Pens scratched. Cameras whirred. She could feel the tension stretch and then settle into something quieter, heavier. I want to be clear, she said. Liberty Skies will not use slogans to solve this. We will use standards. Effective immediately, all discretionary security escalations require corroboration by a second officer, not directly involved. All crew will undergo judgment and de-escalation training grounded in real scenarios, not checklists. An independent review board will oversee complaints, with full authority to act. She paused again, letting the words land. This will be uncomfortable. It should be. The press conference ended without flourish. She stepped back as James took the podium to handle logistics. The room erupted into overlapping questions, but she was already moving, guided through a side door into a quiet corridor where the air felt cooler, steadier. Her legs trembled slightly now that the adrenaline ebbed. She leaned against the wall for a brief moment, closed her eyes, then straightened and walked on. Outside, the afternoon sun cut low across the tarmac. Planes taxied, lifted, departed, each one carrying people who trusted systems they rarely saw. Evelyn watched them for a moment, feeling the old pull, the memory of hands on a yoke, the sound of air over wings. She thought of the veteran in the cabin, of the junior attendant who spoke up too late but spoke up anyway, of Carol Whitman, sitting alone with the realization that certainty had misled her, of Captain Turner, facing the long quiet that follows a hard truth. By evening, the first measures were already moving. Routes adjusted, training schedules locked. The independent board announced. Emails went out to every employee, written plainly, without spin. Some responses came back angry, some grateful, many afraid. Evelyn read them all. At dusk, she returned to the airport, not to a stage, but to a gate where a flight prepared to board. She wore a simple jacket, no insignia. She stood near the window as passengers gathered, watching faces, listening to fragments of conversation. A woman recognized her and nodded once, respectful. A man hesitated, then said, "Thank you." She nodded back. When boarding began, a young gate agent stumbled over an announcement, nervous, correcting herself. Evelyn smiled softly and waited until the line thinned. She approached the counter, spoke quietly, and moved on. Inside the aircraft, the aisle felt familiar. The light was warmer now, evening settling into calm. She paused near the front, then continued all the way back, hand brushing seatbacks, eyes meeting eyes. Near the rear, a little girl watched her with open curiosity. Evelyn knelt, met her gaze, and handed her a small set of plastic wings she kept in her pocket, for reasons she had never fully explained. The girl smiled, wide and bright, clutching them like something precious. "Thank you," the girl's mother whispered. Evelyn stood and nodded, then turned toward the cockpit. She did not enter. She did not need to. She stood for a moment, listening to the steady sounds of preparation, the ordinary rituals that made flight possible. As she stepped back into the jet bridge, she felt a quiet satisfaction, not triumph. The work was far from done. It would take months, years, vigilance that did not fade when the cameras did. But something essential had shifted. A line had been drawn not in anger, but in principle. Later that night, alone in her office, Evelyn wrote a final note to be sent company-wide. It was brief. It did not lecture. It did not comfort. It stated expectations and invited responsibility. She signed it simply, Evelyn. She shut down her computer and stood by the window one last time. The runway lights stretched into the distance, unwavering. She thought of her father's photograph on her desk, of the lesson he had taught her without words. Accountability at altitude begins on the ground. If this story mattered to you, show your support with a like, subscribe for more, and comment 3 words below. Stand for dignity.